She sat in the same chair she had been sitting in every morning for almost 15 years, the old upholstered armchair by the window that faced the backyard. The cushion dipped slightly under her weight, molded perfectly to her shape, as if the chair itself had learned her body over time. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains, landing gently on the framed photographs across the room, faces frozen in years that no longer existed. The phone lay on the side table, silent now, though it had already rung 7 times since dawn. She did not reach for it. There was a time when that sound would have made her heart lift, a time when the name flashing on the screen would have meant purpose, connection, proof that she was still needed. But need had a way of disguising itself as love. She had learned that too late in life, and learning it had cost her almost everything. Her name was Margaret Hale, and she was 71 years old. The hands folded in her lap were not weak, though age had thinned them and traced them with veins like pale blue rivers. Those hands had worked for decades, balancing ledgers, signing contracts, tending gardens, cooking meals that brought people together. They had built something once, a life, a business, a family. And now they rested quietly, as if waiting for permission to finally be still. She had not always been this calm. 3 months earlier, her days had been filled with unease, an undercurrent of dread she could never quite explain. She had blamed it on age at first, on loneliness, on missing her husband, who had been gone long enough that the sharpness of grief had softened into a dull ache that never fully disappeared. But the truth had been heavier than that. The truth had been circling her for years, patient and quiet, waiting for the moment when denial could no longer protect her. The moment came on an ordinary afternoon. She had been looking for a receipt in the home office, an old room that once buzzed with activity, now mostly used for storage. Sunlight slanted across filing cabinets and shelves lined with binders labeled in her husband's handwriting. That was where she found it, not hidden, not locked away, just resting there as if it had every right to exist. A folder. Inside it were printed emails, real estate brochures, handwritten notes. Her address written again and again in different inks. Her property outlined in red on a map. Her land, her house, the small commercial building behind it that had once housed their family business, and her son's handwriting. Margaret remembered the exact sensation that passed through her then, not shock, not anger, but a strange hollowness, like discovering that a familiar room had no floor. She had lowered herself into the chair behind the desk and sat there for a long time, staring at papers that explained her own life to her as if she were already gone. That was when she understood something that would change her forever. This had not begun recently. This had been happening slowly, carefully, over years. She had married Thomas Hale when she was 24. He had been steady, thoughtful, not a man of grand gestures, but of quiet reliability. Together, they had built a modest logistics company from nothing, just a borrowed truck, a rented warehouse, and long days that turned into longer nights. Margaret handled the finances. Thomas handled the operations. They trusted each other without question. The business grew, slowly, honestly, enough to buy land, enough to build a home where their son Andrew would grow up chasing fireflies in the backyard and riding his bike along the gravel drive. Enough to feel proud, not wealthy. Andrew had been their only child, the center of their careful universe. Margaret remembered teaching him how to count change at the kitchen table, how to shake hands firmly, how to look people in the eye. She had believed she was raising a man who understood responsibility. Time, however, has a way of revealing what lessons truly take root. Thomas died quietly one winter morning, seated at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold in front of him. No warning, no chance for goodbyes. Margaret had continued breathing because there was no other option, but something fundamental had shifted inside her that day. The world had become louder, harsher, less forgiving. Andrew stepped in, or so she thought. At first, his concern felt genuine. He checked on her, helped with errands, offered advice about managing the business assets, introduced her to his wife Laura as someone who handled the details. Margaret had been tired. Grieving people often are. She welcomed help without asking too many questions. That was the first mistake. Years passed quietly, but subtly the balance changed. Documents arrived already signed. Decisions were explained after they had been made. Suggestions became expectations. Andrew spoke often of planning for the future, though the future he described never seemed to include her in it. Laura spoke of efficiency, of practicality, of what made sense at Margaret's age. They began referring to her home as an asset, not a place, her business as legacy capital, her savings as unused potential, and Margaret, patient, generous, eager to keep peace, allowed it. She told herself that this was what aging looked like, that stepping back was natural, that love sometimes meant yielding. She did not realize she was being slowly erased. The calls became more frequent after she found the folder. Andrew's voice carried urgency now, concern, even irritation. Laura's messages were sharper, layered with disappointment. They spoke as if she had done something wrong simply by noticing what was happening. Margaret listened. She did not interrupt. She did not accuse, she waited, because waiting had taught her things. One evening, as dusk settled outside the window, Margaret finally made a decision, not out of anger but clarity. She gathered her papers, put on her coat, and drove herself to a law office she had passed for years but never entered. She spoke slowly, carefully. She told her story without drama. And for the first time in a long while, someone listened without trying to redirect her toward convenience. The changes she made that day were quiet ones, legal, precise, unemotional. They did not punish, they protected. When Andrew discovered them weeks later, the reaction was explosive, but Margaret did not raise her voice. She did not justify herself. She did not explain beyond what was necessary. She had spent a lifetime explaining herself. Now she was finished. That was when the true betrayal revealed itself, not in words but absence. Andrew stopped calling. Laura stopped pretending. The silence was deliberate. And Margaret sat in her chair morning after morning, learning the difference between loneliness and peace. She thought often of the past, but not with bitterness. She remembered laughter, hard work, long drives with Thomas beside her. She remembered who she had been before fear crept into her generosity, and slowly something remarkable happened. She felt whole again. The phone remained on the table. It would ring again. She did not fear that anymore. She had learned, finally, that love does not demand your disappearance to survive. Margaret did not mark the days after Andrew's silence began. She had lived long enough to know that counting absence only deepened it. Instead, she let time move the way it wanted to move, slow in the mornings, heavy in the afternoons, almost merciful at night when memories softened into something less sharp. She remained in the same chair, the same room, the same house that now felt strangely reclaimed. For years, she had occupied it like a guest, careful not to disturb the invisible plans being made around her. Now every creak of the floorboards, every tick of the old wall clock felt like a quiet affirmation that she still belonged here. The business building behind the house, the one Thomas had insisted on keeping even after they retired, stood like a silent witness. Margaret could see its roofline from the kitchen window. It had been rented out for years, producing modest but steady income. Andrew had always shown an unusual interest in that building. He called it underutilized. He talked about selling it, leveraging it, unlocking its potential. She had nodded, half listening, assuming his enthusiasm came from ambition rather than intent. The folder had taught her otherwise. As weeks passed, the calls did not resume, but letters arrived. Not handwritten ones, official ones, notifications, inquiries. A subtle tightening around her life, as if unseen hands were testing how much control they still had. One letter came from a real estate firm, thanking her for considering a future listing. She had never contacted them. Another arrived from a bank she did not recognize, referencing preliminary discussions about collateralization of assets. Margaret felt no panic, only a growing certainty. Andrew was not waiting anymore, he was moving. She returned to the law office, this time without hesitation. The attorney listened again, more intently now. Together, they reviewed documents Margaret herself had signed years earlier, papers she had trusted Andrew to explain honestly. There were clauses she barely remembered, permissions granted in the interest of efficiency, temporary authorities that had never been revoked. Margaret did not feel foolish, she felt clear. Efficiency, she realized, was often just another word for exclusion. That afternoon, she made another decision, one she had never imagined making while Thomas was alive. She took control of the business again, not to run it, not to grow it, but to anchor it, to ensure that no one could quietly remove it from her life while she still breathed. The process was tedious. It required patience and stamina she was not sure she still possessed, but with every signature she reclaimed, something inside her straightened. This was not revenge, it was recognition. Andrew noticed almost immediately. The calls resumed, not with warmth but urgency. Messages layered with confusion, then frustration, then something that sounded dangerously like fear. Margaret listened to them once, twice, and then stopped replaying them altogether. She knew this tone. She had heard it in business negotiations decades ago, when people realized the ground beneath them was no longer firm. She did not answer. The first unannounced visit came on a gray afternoon. Andrew stood on the porch longer than necessary, his posture stiff, as if he were bracing himself against something he could not name. Margaret watched him through the window for a long moment before opening the door. She did not rush. She did not hesitate, she simply moved at her own pace. He spoke quickly, too quickly. His words stumbled over one another, filled with explanations and reassurances that arrived too late to sound sincere. He spoke of misunderstandings, of intentions, of family. Margaret listened without interruption. She noticed how his eyes moved not toward her face but past her into the house, toward the spaces he still believed were partly his. When he finished, there was silence. Margaret did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She did not accuse. She told him something simple. She told him that love did not require secrecy. She told him that concern did not come with paperwork prepared in advance. She told him that she was no longer willing to disappear quietly for anyone's convenience. Andrew's face changed then, not into anger, not into remorse. Into something colder, calculated. He spoke again, this time carefully, outlining what he believed was practical, what would inevitably happen as she aged, what would be easier if she cooperated. Margaret felt a deep, unexpected sadness, not for herself, but for the man standing in front of her. Somewhere along the way, he had confused inheritance with entitlement, care with control, family with strategy. She told him he was free to leave. He did not argue, he did not apologize. He left as he had come, already planning his next move. That night, Margaret slept deeply for the first time in months. And in the days that followed, she began to understand something else. Separation did not always announce itself with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it arrived quietly through clarity. Laura sent a message soon after. It was long, polished. Strategic, it spoke of unity and legacy, of keeping things within the family. It ended with a thinly veiled warning about legal complexity and stress at Margaret's age. Margaret read it once, then she deleted it. What Laura did not understand was that Margaret had lived a long life navigating stress. She had endured uncertainty, illness, loss, and decades of responsibility. The idea that she should now fear complexity amused her more than it frightened her. What frightened her instead was how close she had come to losing herself entirely. There were moments, of course, when doubt crept in. Late at night, when the house settled and the past seemed louder than the present, she wondered whether she had been too harsh. Whether motherhood required endless forgiveness, whether she had failed Andrew long before any paperwork existed. But then she would remember the folder, the outlines drawn around her home, the plans made without her, and the doubt would dissolve. One unexpected comfort came from a place she had not anticipated. Her granddaughter, Emily, began visiting more often. Emily was quieter than her brother had been at that age, observant, thoughtful. She did not speak often about her parents, but when she did, her words carried a weight that suggested long-held awareness. Margaret never spoke ill of Andrew or Laura. She did not need to. Emily saw enough on her own. Their afternoons together became a gentle rhythm, tea, shared silences, small routines that asked for nothing but presence. In Emily's company, Margaret felt something she had not felt in years, uncomplicated affection. It was during one such afternoon that Emily said something that stayed with her. She said that watching her grandmother stand her ground had changed how she thought about strength. Margaret said nothing in response. She only reached for Emily's hand and held it. The next twist came quietly, as most important moments do. A letter arrived from a development company, formal, respectful, cautious. They were interested in the land. Not just the building, all of it. They had heard through legitimate channels that ownership had been consolidated recently. They wanted to talk. Margaret sat with the letter for a long time. Thomas had once dreamed aloud about what might be built there someday. He had spoken not of profit but purpose, of usefulness, of leaving something behind that was more than money. Margaret felt him near her then, not as a memory but as a presence, a reminder of who she had been before she started shrinking herself to fit other people's expectations. She agreed to the meeting. She did not tell Andrew. What followed was not triumph but transformation. The negotiations were careful, ethical, slow, the kind that respected history rather than erasing it. Margaret did not rush. She asked questions, she took breaks, she trusted her instincts. When the deal was finalized months later, it did not make headlines, it did not provoke celebration, but it changed everything. The proceeds were substantial, not because she had been clever, but because she had been patient. Because she had refused to be hurried out of her own life. Andrew found out eventually. The reaction was immediate and furious. Accusations arrived through every channel: betrayal, injustice, claims that she had acted out of spite. Margaret did not respond. She did not need to. The truth did not require defense. In the quiet aftermath, Margaret adjusted her life again, not dramatically but deliberately. She funded scholarships in Thomas's name. She ensured Emily's future would never depend on someone else's approval. She made provisions that reflected values, not guilt, and slowly the anger around her faded. What remained was something softer, something earned. She still sat in the same chair each morning. The light still filtered through the curtains. The phone still rang sometimes. But now, when it did, Margaret knew something she had once forgot. She was not waiting to be chosen anymore. She had already chosen herself. Margaret learned, as the months unfolded, that peace does not arrive all at once. It comes in layers, like sediment settling at the bottom of a river after a storm. At first, the water still looks cloudy. You think the turbulence remains, but if you wait, if you do nothing but allow time to move, the clarity eventually returns. She continued to sit in the same chair, in the same room, at the same hour every morning. That constancy became her anchor. Outside, the seasons shifted, leaves browned and fell, snow came late and left early, spring followed without asking permission. Inside, Margaret's life grew quieter but not emptier. Andrew did not disappear entirely. He circled the edges of her existence like someone uncertain whether to knock or walk away forever. There were messages that hovered between apology and accusation. There were calls that rang once and stopped. He never came back to the house unannounced again. Something about that last conversation, about her stillness, her refusal to bend, had unsettled him more than anger ever could. Margaret thought about him often, though not with the sharp pain she once felt. She thought of the boy he had been, the man he had tried to become, the space between those two versions where something essential had gone missing. She understood, in a way only time allows, that love does not guarantee understanding, and sacrifice does not ensure gratitude. There was a night late in the year when the truth finally surfaced in a way even Andrew could not deflect. Margaret received a call from someone she did not expect, Andrew's former business partner, a man she barely knew but whose voice carried weariness rather than malice. He spoke carefully, choosing his words with the caution of someone stepping across fragile ground. He explained that Andrew had overextended himself, that loans had been taken based on assumptions, that Margaret's assets had been spoken of as inevitabilities rather than possibilities. Margaret felt no surge of anger as she listened, only confirmation. When the call ended, she sat for a long time in silence, her hands folded, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular. This then was the full shape of it, not desperation, not misguided concern, but planning built on entitlement, a future constructed on the quiet erasure of the present. Andrew called 2 days later. Margaret answered this time. His voice was different, stripped of strategy, hollowed out. He spoke of stress, of pressure, of mistakes. He spoke of how he had believed everything would work out if she just cooperated, if she just trusted him one last time. Margaret listened without interruption, as she had always done. When he finished, she spoke slowly, carefully, not to wound but to be heard. She told him that trust is not something you demand after betraying it. She told him that love does not excuse manipulation. She told him that she had spent too many years being managed instead of being known. There was silence on the other end, then something unexpected. Andrew cried, not loudly, not theatrically, quietly, like a man realizing that something irreversible had already happened. He did not ask for money, he did not ask for forgiveness, he asked only whether she still loved him. Margaret closed her eyes. She told him the truth. She told him that love does not disappear just because boundaries appear. She told him that she would always be his mother, but she would never again be his safety net. She told him that if there was to be any future between them, it would have to be built on honesty, not need. Andrew did not argue. He said goodbye. That was the last time they spoke for many months. Life did not suddenly become radiant. It became steady. Margaret found comfort in small routines. She cooked for herself again, not out of obligation, but pleasure. She tended the garden Thomas had planted, noticing details she had missed when her mind had been elsewhere. She allowed herself to rest without guilt. Emily continued to visit. Their bond deepened into something rare and unspoken. Margaret never positioned herself as a replacement parent. She did not need to. She was simply present. That was enough. On Margaret's 72nd birthday, Emily gave her a simple gift, a framed photograph of the house taken at sunset, the light warm against its aging walls. On the back, she had written a single sentence, "Thank you for staying." Margaret held the frame for a long time. The final turning point came not with confrontation but acceptance. Andrew wrote a letter, not an email, not a message. A letter. The handwriting was uneven, as if he had written it slowly. He did not justify himself. He did not explain away his actions. He acknowledged them, fully. He spoke of therapy, of realizing how much he had confused provision with affection, of understanding, perhaps too late, how close he had come to losing her entirely. He did not ask for anything. He ended by saying that whether or not she responded, he needed her to know that he finally saw her, not as a resource, not as a solution, but as a person who had been carrying more than she ever should have. Margaret placed the letter in the drawer beside her chair. She did not cry, she breathed. That night she dreamed of Thomas. Not as he had been at the end, but as he had been in their early years, standing beside her, hands in his pockets, watching her with quiet pride. She woke with a sense of closure she had not realized she was missing. Time moved forward. Margaret aged, as everyone does, but without fear. She made arrangements that reflected wisdom rather than obligation. She spoke openly with Emily about life, about money, about dignity. She left nothing unsaid that mattered. Andrew visited again eventually, not often, not dramatically. They spoke politely, carefully. Something fragile existed between them, not the relationship they once had, but something honest. Margaret accepted that. Forgiveness, she learned, does not require forgetting, it requires truth. On a calm afternoon, much like the one she was living in now, Margaret reflected on the path she had walked, on how close she had come to being reduced to a footnote in her own life, on how strength sometimes looks like silence and courage sometimes looks like saying no without apology. She did not regret choosing herself. She wished only that she had learned sooner that self-respect is not selfishness. That boundaries are not cruelty, that love to survive must allow room for dignity. The phone sat on the table, it did not ring, and for the first time Margaret did not feel the need for it to. She was exactly where she belonged.